Hello and welcome back to another episode of Headstrong. My name is Louis Strong and I host this show. Now, if you are listening for the first time, Headstrong is a podcast where I sit down with a variety of people in the public eye to talk to them about their lives and their careers, but notably their vulnerabilities, to inspire the listener to understand what it means to be headstrong. This series, I am exclusively covering the sport of cricket. I have spoken to a number of past and present cricketers to talk to them about their own experiences. This series is sponsored by McGill and Partners and Ascot Group, who have shown some tremendous support. Part of this kind support has come in the form of donations to the Ruth Strauss Foundation, who Headstrong are supporting for this series. I am immensely proud to be supporting the Ruth Strauss Foundation with this series of Headstrong and Innings with. I have been joined by Deepa and Karina on this episode, and we sat down to have a chat about the Ruth Strauss Foundation. We talk about how the charity was formed, the specifics and the details of what the charity stands for, and the amazing work that they do. So without further ado, here is the episode with the Ruth Strauss Foundation, which I really hope you find engaging and informative. And if you would like to donate £10 to the Ruth Strauss Foundation, please text 70191, writing RSF10. Deepa and Karina, thank you for joining me on Headstrong for this episode about the Ruth Strauss Foundation. How are you both?
Wonderful, thanks, Louis.
Really good. It's great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Oh my gosh, my absolute pleasure. And I'm really looking forward to this episode because I think for many cricket fans, many people know about the charity, but I don't think that they know the ins and outs of what it means. They've seen what the Red for Ruth days and what the power it can have, but they don't know enough about it. And I think that that's what I want to capture in this episode. So I think probably first off to you, Karina, I just would like to know a little bit more about the Ruth Strauss Foundation and specifically why it was set up.
Yes, okay. So, well, as you'll know, that the Ruth Strauss Foundation is set up by Andrew in memory of his late wife, Ruth. Ruth died in 2018 of a form of lung cancer that affects non-smokers. Ruth never smoked a cigarette in her life. She was a very fit and healthy human being, sickeningly so, actually. She was into yoga and she was so she was vibrant, and it was a complete shock that she was, diagnosed with a form of lung cancer that affects those people that don't smoke. Just before she died, she knew she didn't have long left to live. Ruth and Andrew had a conversation about how something positive could come out of this awful situation. And that was the kind of person that Ruth was, really. She was very selfless. She was the kind of person who, always remembered your birthday, or actually always remembered the kids' birthdays. I don't know how she did it, but she did. So it doesn't surprise me at all that in the last few moments of her life, she sat down with Andrew and wrote down on a piece of paper what the foundation in her name could be all about, and how it could, how some positive could come from it. So that's why we're here. That's why the foundation exists. It was Ruth's idea, and she wrote it down, and she felt very strongly on two things, that families in the same situation that her family was in, where a parent of young children under 18 has been given this awful diagnosis that one of the parents hasn't got long to live, that the family should be supported through that. They should be given advice on how they can talk to their children about their diagnosis, how they can have open and honest conversations with the children. And she didn't feel like that was readily available. And they found it, luckily, in the end, through Jenny Thomas, who we work with. But it wasn't something that was offered. It wasn't easy to find. It wasn't easily accessible. So she felt really strongly that needed to change. And the second part of our mission is around non-smoking lung cancer. And just her frustrations, I suppose, that nobody could really give any answers on why she was diagnosed with this this awful disease, and that there didn't seem to be enough information out there on why people contract non-smoking lung cancer, but also how to treat them effectively, and how we could prevent them in the future. So essentially that's what the foundation is here to do, is, you know, support, honour her vision and her wishes on those two sides of our mission.
It's really incredible. I absolutely love the mission. Obviously, that's why I'm supporting the Ruth Strauss Foundation. Is wonderful, and she sounds, she honestly sounds like the most wonderfully selfless woman, and I love that it's come from her, deep down, and that's still rooted in what the foundation stands for. But how common is lung cancer, and specifically those that don't smoke? I mean, how common is that? And very sadly for Ruth, how common is that to happen nowadays?
Really, really good question. So, firstly, let's look at lung cancers. There are about 39,300 new cases of lung cancer in England each year. And actually, lung cancers are the biggest cause of cancer death in England. And now, going on to non-smoking lung cancers. So, firstly, non-smoking lung cancers occur in people who've smoked less than 100 cigarettes in their lifetime. So that's the definition. If you're categorised as a non-smoking related lung cancer, that's what you've done, is had less than 100 cigarettes. And out of those 39,300 cases, about 15% of those are related to non-smoking lung cancer. So it's more than many might think, actually. And if it was taken as a separate category, so if they broke down lung cancer as one category and then did non-smoking lung cancer as another, it'd be the 8th most common cause of cancer-related death in the UK. And that's about 6,000 deaths every year.
Wow.
So it's huge. It's huge.
And what can we do in that capacity then to do more for that? It's probably the $1 billion question, obviously. But in what sense, in what way can we help in that regard from that side of the foundation?
So actually, one of the things we're doing is trying to raise awareness of non-smoking lung cancers. So we've actually been involved with Public Health England a bit earlier this year on a campaign to raise awareness to the general public, so all of us know what the potential signs of non-smoking lung cancer are. And then the other thing we're doing right now, actually, at the moment, is we've partnered with 2 other patient-led cancer charities called ALK Positive UK, so that's ALK Positive UK, and EGFR Positive UK. The work we're doing with both those charities is to run a GP awareness campaign. So it's all well and good that you and me and the rest of us know what the symptoms could be, but you land at the doorstep of your GP, they also need to know what the potential signs and symptoms are. And what the campaign does is it highlights 9 people who are living with a non-smoking lung cancer at the moment. And the photographs for the campaign have been taken by Rankin, who's a really renowned photographer, as many people will know. And each of those individuals who are aged 28 to 65 had quite a delay in being diagnosed. It took months, actually. So that's why this campaign is really important. It's a great question about what can we all do, and what primary care practitioners can do is, if someone is in front of them, whether it's virtually or in person, they recognise that even though this person might not fit the typical symptoms for a lung cancer patient, they may have a non-smoking lung cancer. Because actually more younger women and people who've never smoked are getting lung cancer. So despite the incidence of smoking is going down in the UK and globally, the incidence of non-smoking lung cancer are going up. So we need to make sure that we diagnose people earlier, because that gives them the best options for treatment and curative treatment.
No, absolutely. Now, and on the other side of the foundation then as well, there we were talking about the pre-bereavement as well. What is the definition of pre-bereavement? Because, of course, we know the word bereavement, and it's often one of those subjects that is actually talked about far less in this society. But why is it so important to talk about pre-bereavement and what it actually means and stands for?
That's a good question, because actually, as you know, that people talk quite widely around bereavement support, and there are a number of charities and support groups out there who support people when they've lost lost a parent or lost a loved one. And what we're talking about here is pre-bereavement. So it's the period of time when someone has been diagnosed with an incurable terminal illness and up until that person's death. So what we feel really strongly about is that, especially when there's young children involved, that the family should be supported to have those open conversations with their children, because what the research tells us is children fathom it out. They know that something's going on, and actually what we do know is that, generally speaking, especially if you've got really young kids, your instinct is to put a protective ring around the children, to sort of not tell them the full story. Things are happening in the background, but they pick up on these little signals. And actually, Ruth really wanted to have those conversations, but she needed help with that. So Andrew and Ruth needed some guidance on, actually, how do I phrase those questions? To what extent do I give all the truth? I don't really know how to approach this. And so what we're insistent on is that actually our very much our hope for the future is that every family that is facing the death of a parent is offered, not just has access to, but is offered the support they need to prepare the family for the future. So that is having those conversations, those quite difficult conversations. But ultimately, what we do know is that if a child is prepared for the death of a parent, they will manage the after effect of that much more. They will be able to cope with the event better if they've been prepared and they've been part of those conversations, but also giving the sort of permission to make memories and make the most of those last few moments together. So that's pre-bereavement support, and actually we're on a bit of a culture change piece with this, because actually it's not something that's widely talked about, but as we say, we feel really strongly that it is as important, if not even more important, than bereavement support. And if you get the pre-bereavement bit right, there might be less need for bereavement support. Because actually, if you've had these conversations before then you might need less support afterwards, in particular when kids are involved.
It's so important. It's such an important part of the process, which actually should be part of the norm. And I can see what the foundation and what Ruth wanted is, because you want to be able to talk about that and have that conversation, and you don't want the difficulties that surround it. And so the mission that you're going through of making it just accessible for everyone, not a choice, but it just allowed. It's something that should just be allowed. And yeah, it's so important. How many children are bereaved then of a parent in the UK?
Well, I have to say, when we started looking at this, because obviously we knew what Ruth felt very strongly about, and Andrew carrying her legacy forward, but actually when we started, we didn't really know what the situation was. How many families are faced with this awful situation every year, and it's actually quite staggering. There are over 23,000 families with children under the age of 18 every single year that have to have this conversation, or are diagnosed with incurable illness, that have young children. So there's a significant unmet need out there for these families, to not knowing where to turn to have these conversations with their children, and that equates to around about 41,000 children every year who lose a parent, which
it's staggering.
It really is.
And it just shows the essential work that is needed. And actually it's one of those things, because bereavement and indeed pre-bereavement have been not talked about for so long. It's surprising to see that it's taken this long for a conversation to occur, and indeed a foundation to exist where it makes it so accessible for everybody.
And I think, Ruth called it doing death well. And, on her piece of paper, she also talked about the taboo around death and dying. And actually, that's a big part of what we're about is, yes, we want to support families in their time of need. But actually, it's even wider than that. What we're saying is that we want to encourage, people, and especially with children, to have more open conversations more generally about death and dying. To sort of try and burst some of those taboos of having these conversations. Is the sort of stiff upper lip Brit thing, try and break down some of those barriers. which we think which will, and as long as people understand, how to talk to their children and have that guidance, then we know that it would make the difference for the family for the future, because this is a story of hope. And and the children do go on, and just to be able to, Ruth in particular, I know that she just wanted to know that her kids were going to be all right because they'd had those conversations.
Definitely. I mean, now if we can look specifically at children, then why is it so important for to prepare children for the death of a parent? Like, what are the benefits of this, conversation, and this kind of part of their lives where they are being prepared for it?
That's such an important question. One of the reasons it's really important, as Karina said, is if a parent is diagnosed with a terminal condition, the child is likely to have a sense that something is going on. So maybe if we think about all the treatment for different conditions, parents might physically look different. Their energy levels might be different. They might not be going to work as routine, going to hospital appointments, all sorts of things. The children are picking up that actually their life and their day-to-day life has changed. And we can all imagine putting ourselves in the child's shoes, that if something is happening, our daily routine has changed around us, we can sense something is going on, but nobody's told us. So that level of confusion, particularly for a younger child, will be huge. So that's one of the reasons it's important. But also, as Karina talked about earlier, how do we make the most of that time that's left? That time, it may be months, it could be 18 months even, but that gift, that time that's remaining, is so important for children and families, and those that remain. So it's not just for the dying parent, but those that remain after that death. It gives them the opportunity to have a lifetime of memories and happy memories, actually. And there's lots of research to show that if it's not done well, what are the long-term impacts? So it's not just tomorrow or the day after, it could be years to come. There's some research that shows children can be left with unresolved grief for up to 9 years after a parental death. I came across some really, quite sad research that showed if you lost a parent before the age of 16, you're more likely to be unemployed at the age of 30. So that's decades on. And then you look at, outcomes in education and schools. There's research done in Britain that shows you do worse in GCSEs, for example, and there's research in Europe as well around that. So the ripple effect is huge, and we can just imagine that for children at all different ages, what is going on for them. So, if you're a teenager, maybe you don't want your friends to know, you don't want your school to know what's going on for you at home, but you need a support structure. So that's why it's really important. So if parents are having this conversation with children and teenagers, then actually those that are around them, part of their support network, are all, if they are informed by the parent, it's the parent's choice. It's their choice whether they decide to tell their children, how they decide to have that conversation. Then that support network is also there for that whole family, not just for the child, not just for the parent.
So how do you support families to have these conversations then? Because, as you say, the timeline could be with years after as well. And say you're only given a couple of months to prepare. What do you do to support that?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that. So we're actually setting up our family support service for this summer. What that means is that we'll provide parents with advice and guidance on how to communicate to their children about their terminal diagnosis. And as I said earlier, each family is different, their circumstances are different. So we want to ensure that every conversation we have with the parent is tailored, it's based on their needs. And we'll give them the space to have that conversation with our staff. And it might be things like, they might ask questions, and the questions we do get asked is, when's the right time to tell my child? How should I tell them? What words should I use? What would be the reaction I could expect? And we will give them the space to have that conversation, because the parent knows their child and knows them well and may even be able to anticipate what the reaction might be. So we want to be there to support them along that journey. And also we want to make sure that if they've got questions after they've had that conversation, they can come back and speak to the same person, because the worst thing is having to repeat everything you've told one person, then have to say it to another. So we want to provide that continuity for the family. And we also want to, just another point that I wanted to make is we also want to make sure that when we think about circumstance, let's think about the fact it's the condition. If there are two parents, what is the setup? Are there siblings? What do they already know about the illness? So, the terminal diagnosis hasn't just come, so maybe they've seen the parent get progressively unwell and they've seen them have treatment. Maybe we're doing quite well for a while and then have gotten more unwell. So all of those things have to be taken into consideration, because some parents may not have told their child that actually I've been diagnosed with this condition, whereas others might have. Maybe the child's even visited them and come with them to appointment. So we've really got to consider all of that. But the main thing is, we really respect the fact that the parent knows the child. So we're there to support the parent if they decide to tell their children about their diagnosis.
I think something that I take away from what the Ruth Strauss Foundation stands for is it makes those impossible conversations bearable and manageable and allowed to happen in a safe space to generate a healthy conversation around something that should be talked about. And I think that's what phew. No. I truly mean that. And I'm so pleased to be supporting something so wonderful. And I know that it's such a small part in everything that you do in comparison to some of the big stages that the charity can be seen. But to open conversation to new people and open new doors to other people and let this conversation be allowed to happen is so important. And I'm all for it. And I literally couldn't agree more with anything that the foundation does, with everything that you do. So thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. We really captured the essence of what the Ruth Strauss Foundation stands for. We can still donate to you. It's always open, not just during my podcast series. The charity is always in need of donations, as all charities are, but specifically my efforts for the Ruth Strauss Foundation are, if not more now, having spoken to you both.
Thank you, Louis. And thank you so much for the opportunity and all your support.
No, my pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for helping us get the word out there, because it's great to have the donations, and it's also great to raise awareness. So this has been a brilliant opportunity for us. Really appreciate it.
That's really kind. Thank you so much. Well, long may it continue.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you very, very much to Deepa and Karina for joining me on this episode of Headstrong. What an incredibly powerful episode. I'm extremely lucky to have gotten to speak to Karina and Deepa, who are immensely busy, and their schedules are far too busy to be spent doing podcasts with me. However, they did give up their time, and I cannot thank them enough. If you would like to donate to the Ruth Strauss Foundation, please text 70191, writing RSF10. Or, in the bio below this podcast episode, you will see the Just Giving page where you can donate any sum of money, and every single amount is hugely appreciated. I will join you on Monday for another episode of Headstrong.